Good morning, guys. Welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be changing fuel injectors on my 2007 Toyota Yaris. So lately the vehicle has been experiencing a little bit of performance issues. Been a bit of delay on when I go wide open throttle and the vehicle responding. There's been a little bit of a stutter upon startup, and then the fuel trims have kind of been all over the place. I've done quite a bit of diagnosing, and my ignition system, from what I can tell, is good. New spark plugs, new ignition coils. As far as the air induction system, everything is good there. New air filter, no air obstructions of any kind that I can see, no vacuum leaks. And then regarding the fuel system, I have tested it doing a fuel pressure and a leak down test, and everything checked out. So I rolled out the fuel pressure regulator, fuel pump. However, I'm a little bit suspicious of the fuel injectors. With how old it is, I kind of imagine the O-rings on them are a little bit leaky. I imagine their spray patterns are a little bit intermittent and not ideal. I feel like I did confirm this because I put a boroscope down into the cylinders. Two of the cylinders were pretty clean for their mileage, whereas two other cylinders were quite a bit dirty and a lot of carbon buildup. I believe maybe a couple of those injectors are perhaps leaking fuel where they're not supposed to. I'm not 100% sure, but we're going to change them out and see for ourselves. Let's go. We need to disable the fuel pump, and we need to get to it underneath that seat. This right here is the electrical connection to the fuel pump. We're going to remove that. Crank the ignition a few times to depressurize the system. At the very minimum, you're going to want to remove the negative lead on the battery. However, I'm going to remove the whole thing just to give myself better access. The fuel injectors are going to be down in here, right next to this electrical connection and ignition coils. And it's going to be a really good idea to clean up as much of the mess as possible. So when we remove those fuel injectors, no debris or dirt falls down into the cylinders. So we're just going to use a shop vac and some micro suction adapters. We did a fairly good job of cleaning it up, but there still is some debris. Wouldn't be a bad idea to use some compressed air to try to get out the rest. There is an additional connection right here that you'll need to disconnect. So I have this electrical harness sort of lifted up. I think that's going to give me just enough room in order to lift this fuel rail up. There is a 10mm bolt on the side that holds in the fuel rail that you'll have to remove. It is right there. When you're ready to lift up the fuel rail, grab your eye protection and gloves. There's these little spacers for the fuel rail. I'd recommend just lifting them out right now. Take note of how they sit in the fuel rail. This is where it might get a little wet and messy. This forced one can be a little bit tricky, so just take your time with it. So there's all 4 injectors. Make sure that they have all 4 insulators and all 4 O-rings were removed. You don't want those stuck in the fuel rail or down in the cylinder hole. So here's the 4 new fuel injectors that we're going to install. You have to buy separately the fuel injector insulators. So we're just comparing these to make sure that they are the same. Part number is slightly different. At some point they switched to Denso for the manufacturing. But just verify your part numbers and make sure everything's good. Here's the fuel injector holes, and the best that you can, I would recommend to keep them covered. And also, if you do this job, don't park under a tree or something like that where stuff may or debris may fall into those holes. I would recommend getting those, if there's any dirt or grime in there, which there was in this case, just get those clean, because that's going to be the new mating surface for those fuel injector insulators. Basically what I did, I just used a Q-tip and I dabbed it with a little bit of gasoline and cleaned those bottoms. Just be very careful. Obviously you don't want lint or the Q-tip itself to fall in that hole, and do that for all 4 of them. So the insulator will just push on to the spray nozzle right there. And we're going to first install the injector into the fuel rail. We'll just want to coat this O-ring with a little bit of fuel. I just have this little bottle of fuel that I will dab onto that O-ring. Slide this O-ring and end of the injector into the fuel rail. You'll want to gently twist it into place until you feel it pop in. It's kind of a feel thing. So I actually didn't even realize it until probably about halfway through. But because you can't directly see the fuel injector holes on the fuel rail, there are these little marks that will help guide you where those holes are. So take note of where those are at and let that guide you. Now we're going to make sure that the fuel injectors are fully seated in the rail and at the bottom portion where the insulators go into the fuel injector holes. Make sure to give them a twist on the rail to make sure they are seated properly. Make sure you slide the spacers into place. So it took a bit of finagling, but I actually ended up taking them out, and I put the insulators down into the holes first. I found that worked a little bit easier. And then you want to gently seat that fuel rail as evenly down as possible, and then visually check that those bottom insulators are fully into place. So now we're going to screw down the bolts that hold down the fuel rail. I typically like to get new hardware just so I don't have to deal with any rust issues later on, but it's optional. But let's get this fuel rail down, set evenly. Just get them started by hand. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and address that side bolt to make sure that that lines up correctly. Once you're confident that you have everything set in place and the way it needs to be, and you've evenly screwed down that fuel rail, we'll go ahead and torque these bolts. This side one will be 80 inch-pounds with a 10mm socket. These front fuel rail bolts will be 14 foot-pounds with a 12mm socket. It'd help if I put the 12mm socket on. Make sure you're still able to turn the fuel injectors on the fuel rail side. That feels good. There shouldn't be any resistance. Just straighten them up now, so we'll be able to align the electrical connections later. We'll get everything back into its place now. So let's go ahead and get this back on the bracket. Give it a little tug, make sure it's secure. If you ever confused the order of the electrical connections, just remember black, gray, and that's for the fuel injectors along with the ignition coils. You can also just look at the sides of the harnesses. The left side electrical connections are going to go to cylinders 1 and 2, and the right hand side electrical connections are going to go to cylinder 3 and 4. And then just look at their lengths and it makes sense. Just make sure all the connections click. So an important safety consideration is to ensure that you have a fire extinguisher on hand. I didn't mention it at the beginning of the video, I forgot, but it has been nearby this whole time, and especially when you go to start it and you have ignition, make sure you have this on hand. What we're going to do now is we're going to prime the system, and we're just going to put the key to the on position but engine off, and we're going to inspect where those fuel injectors are and make sure there's not any leaks before we start the car. Just let it run for a little while at idle. You may have a little bit of a, or you might have a bit of a stutter when you initially start it. That's just all that fuel going initially through those new injectors. So just let it sit and idle and inspect for leaks. You can double check to see if you got any duds. You just grab a stethoscope and you can listen to the injectors for a pulse. You'll know it when you hear it. Yeah, I hear that pulse, pretty distinct. Now we're just gonna check for any check engine lights. So we don't have any check engine lights. That's always a good sign. Make sure you put the beauty cover back on.